series that has been supported by the Secretariat for English speaking, for Relations with English speaking Community of Quebec. And it's a workshop that this one, as others, is part of our response to you around capacity building. We've heard from many that, many of you, that one of the things
Sylvia got muted.
Sylvia, you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry, I was saying one of the things we heard is that you want us to focus more or think about focusing on helping you build up your capacity in your organizations. Recognizing that some of the organizations are bigger, smaller, you've got 3 people, you've got 7, you might even have only 1 person. But we're paying a lot of attention to what kinds of subjects we could bring to you. So this introduction to the strategic use of information is actually an introduction. We're going to see how it goes today. This is no reflection on Jean-François, but we'll see the reaction, and we'll see if, in fact, and I want your feedback at the end, if this is something that this piece of work is something that you would want to pursue. So you're going to be introduced to key concepts related to information and information systems, and we'll review some examples of information strategies. So the value of information for a QCGN and for you as the members and stakeholders is terrifically important for what we try and do. And so today we've got senior consultant, Jean-François Paget, senior consultant with KSAR and Associates. And I've known Jean-François for a few years, and he's helped us on a few projects. One in particular is our Access to Justice project. And he is a data and information strategist. We'll see what that, on va voir ce que ça mange en hiver, ça, in the next 2 hours. We'll see what that looks like. He's not scary, he's terrific. He's going to work with us for 2 hours and see how in your organization you can use some of the tricks of the trade in information gathering, information gathering and sharing that will be helpful to you in your everyday work. So, Jean-François, over to you.
Sylvia, so just to begin, I'm going to echo what Sylvia mentioned. So the conversation today will be really an overview of some of the key concepts in the world of information. So it is in no means, so what it's not going to be a deep dive into the biggest trends of technology and all the world of analytics and all that good stuff. It's going to be very simple, practical, grounded information, but we're still going to skim a few of the key components just to give you a sense and a feel for what do we mean by strategic use of information, and what could you do in your own organization to start thinking in that perspective. Okay, so that's really the objective of today, and we're going to walk through a series of content, but I also have work for you. So there are going to be some breakout sessions where you'll be able to put into practice some of the concepts we're going to be discussing today, where we'll have also a discussion on all of this. It's always tough for me to do these types of sessions on Zoom. It's not the same feel as if I would have a crowd or individuals with me. So I'll have to accept it and bear with me as well. So I can't see you all that much. I have more than one screen, so you might see me going, looking everywhere because I'm trying to manage to see people, the presentation and everything. But I'll try to be as dynamic as I can be, even though I'm sitting in my little bunker in my basement, okay? I also want to encourage you to ask as many questions as you would like. But again, given the fact that we're on Zoom, I would ask you to ask your questions through the chat if possible. And again, ask away. I might not be able to answer all the questions, but I'd like you to write them down anyways, so we can have a sense of what are the questions that are arising, and I'll be able to answer them afterwards and send something to the QCGN, perhaps in the form of an FAQ, but at least I like you to put your questions on the table, okay? So don't hesitate to do so. We'll try to find ways as well for you to interact a little more, so it's not just a monologue or me talking for 2 hours, but just for the sake of trying to keep the balance in the Zoom, let's try to use the chat as much as possible, okay? In terms of housekeeping items, the coffee and the amenities are where you left them or where you should already know where they are. So hope that's good for you. Hope you have a good cup of coffee or water or whatever you need. And so let's get started. So I will share my presentation. Can you see the presentation? Good. So I've already given you the introduction. All right. So today, like I mentioned, is going to be an overview, but we're going to really look at four big components. The first one is, what is an information strategy? So we're talking about the strategic use of information, and you'll hear me say information strategy quite often. So let's talk about it right on the onset and define what that is. We'll go through an overview of the key components of an information strategy, so you understand not what it is, not just what it is, but what are the components, what do they mean, and get a good grasp of, okay, so if I want to assess what that means for me, what would that look like? Okay, I'm going to provide you with a concrete example of an information strategy. I'm conscious that the theme may sound a bit abstract, so we'll get to a very concrete example of, here's a situation, a real life situation of a client that evolved in the following way. Here are the issues that he tackled with this and where he is at today, okay? And since this is a workshop as well, we want to be sure that you get something also out of it. It's not just a lecture on the notions of information strategy. So we'll also talk a bit about getting started with an information strategy. So once we get through the concepts, what would you have to look for in your organization? And what should you assess to be able to size the level of readiness and a way forward with starting to use information strategically? Okay, so those are really the main topics for today. So let's get into it. Okay, so I tried to provide you with a very, very simple notion of what is an information strategy. So first off, it's a course of action, and it's a course of action using information to accomplish something. Okay, so it can be to solve an issue or harness an opportunity through the collection and exploitation of information. So you understand that you have an issue in your organization, don't really know how to go about it, and then having or accessing information to give you a sense of what that may look like may help you move forward. It's to create and harness information to enhance the achievement of an organizational objective. So again, here, not only just harness, but create. So how to go about having the information that you need to achieve an organizational objective if the information doesn't exist from the onset. It's using information to create a strategic advantage for your organization. So there's a gain also to be done through information. So for instance, if you find yourself with unique information that is very valuable to an environment, to stakeholders, or very valuable for you to be able to move forward either an agenda, an argument, or anything of the sort, then you're in a situation where you can actually use that information to create a strategic advantage for your organization. Okay, so we'll explore that as well. It's exploiting information to improve the performance of the organization. So the first three bullets are perhaps more outward looking, more pursuing strategic objectives. Information is also very useful to increase the performance. So looking within and understanding how well the organization is performing, and we can think of evaluations, metrics, understanding the operational performance of the organization, and getting the information that you need to be able to assess that and do either the corrective measures or take on again the opportunities. And it's also to use information to generate organizational or systemic change. Okay, so it's viewed as using information within the confines of your organization to improve, or it's also a question of looking at how can information help you move what's around you. Okay, so those are, this is a general perspective of what we are meaning by an information strategy. And again, remembering that it's a course of action. It's not just a question of answering the philosophical question about it. It's how do we do this? Okay, how do we use information to do that? Okay. So when is an information strategy needed? Now that we've went through the general concept, there are a few situations where information becomes very useful. The first example, and I really like the image of the wall, by the way. Bang head here. When we seem to be banging our head against the wall on trying to solve an issue that we've tried and tried and tried, and for some odd reason, we're still hitting the same wall. And I can try to use simplistic or very concrete examples of, let's say your organization has been trying to get some funding for a specific program. And it's the third and fourth time that you're trying for a funding application that you're putting forward what you're trying to describe as a need for your clients, and nobody seems to be hearing it, okay? And you're trying and trying, and it seems like something's not sticking. An information strategy can be very useful at that point to start looking at the issue more broadly and more into depth, to perhaps see how you can create new connections and new arguments to demonstrate something that you already have, that you know anecdotally is necessary, but that you can turn that into evidence-based arguments, okay? An information strategy is also needed when you're in a situation where you have a sense of where you want to go, but there are so many options in front of you that it's a question of, okay, how do we decide a way forward here, okay? I can see 17 way forward, how do I decide, okay? And so again, information can help focus decision-making and focus and channel what opportunities seems to yield the best result, best outcome, yield something that makes more sense for you. So it can help constrict and focus options and decisions, okay? The third example here is what you see with the maze. So in a situation of complexity, faced with a complex system, faced with a complex issue, sometimes we get lost in all the details and intricacies of the complexity. And an information strategy can help by focusing a way forward, know on what to focus to actually yield the outcome or generate the change you want or get to your objectives. So it helps channel and focus the effort in a more concise manner to get through the complexity. So it helps cut through the complexity, okay? And in using examples of any public system, public systems are very complex. There are so many stakeholders, so many players, so many considerations, piece of information here and there. So to start with an information strategy saying, we want to get here. I understand that I have all this to consider, but if I focus on the following three aspects of the system and I push something forward, will I be able to cut through? And again, with information, it becomes possible to do so, okay? And again, we'll get into some concrete examples. The fourth scenario of when an information strategy can be needed is when we get into a scenario of too much information, okay? We are flooded with data, we are flooded with information, and the challenge in certain cases is that we have so much information that we have no idea where to begin. So trying to start to say, okay, well, we're going to use everything and we're going to try to sort through all of that becomes such a burden that we just either give up or don't know where to go. So again, the approach that an information strategy can bring is help define the focus and remove the information that, yes, could be valuable in other contexts, but is irrelevant to what you're trying to achieve, and helps you focus on the things that are valuable and will get you there. So it helps deal with the too much information. So in other words, when an organization is faced with an issue that seems to be banging their heads against the wall and needs a new perspective, information can help broaden that horizon. When an organization is faced with multiple ways forward and needs to understand how to decide and focus, information becomes useful. It helps also to remove distractions and again, focus the intervention of the organization on what seems to make the more sense and push the way forward. Okay. I'm not seeing the chat here. I just want to be sure there are no questions. Miguel, I'll ask, I forgot to
there's
introduce
nothing
Miguel,
in the chat.
so thank you. So I'll just so I introduce you, Miguel. So Miguel is one of the resources that works with KSAR. He's my technical right arm on the world of technology, and he's going to be navigating, he's the host of all this situation. So I'm going to refer to you, Miguel, once in a while, just to be sure that if you see the chat go up, please let me know, okay?
Will do.
Thank you. All right, so before we get into the key components of the information strategy, so I gave you a general feel of this, but before we get into the component, I want to clarify one thing, okay? This may sound lofty and very complex, and when we talk about information, the image that may come into your mind is, very complex artificial intelligence, very big information systems. You may have a view of a table in a meeting room with a holographic where you can grab stuff around and throw them. That may be the pinnacle of what information can do and be. But what I want to be sure to clarify here is that this notion of using information can be applied in very, very simplistic, very focused manner, regardless of the size of the organization, okay? And so it can be a matter of knowing how to use one or two specific surveys that will yield you the information that you need to be able to move an objective forward. It can be very, very simple. And so I want to be sure that as we're moving into the next pieces, that you don't feel that this is only accessible for big organizations with big budgets, because it is not. It can be scaled down and adapted to pretty much any given situation. And the organization, the example that we're going to be talking on later on is a good example of that. It was an organization that had very limited capacity that built something quite interesting, okay? So it is the notion that we're going to be discussing are applicable regardless of the size of the organization, regardless of the resources. It's a matter of working with what you've got and understanding how you can use information that you have or find the information that you don't to help you move forward. Okay? So let's get into the components of information. So, okay, here we go. So why is information valuable or so valuable? And I don't, you may have already heard this, but data is now considered the #1 commodity for any given organization. So data is the new oil. It has the most significant value for any given organization. And there are a series of reasons for that, okay? Because it helps shape our understanding of an environment. So it's through data that we understand what's going on around us. It supports our understanding of problems and issues impacting the organization. So without data, without information, it's very hard to grasp what's actually going on, okay? And so data and information is now fundamental to the practice of pretty much any organization. This is even truer in the world of organization that provides services, because all you do is exchange information, okay? If you're providing a service, generally speaking, if it's intangible, you're not, if you're not producing cans of tomato soups and selling cans of tomato soups, and you're providing a service, it means that you're exchanging information. You're sharing information, you're bringing information and knowledge to individuals. Individuals are bringing information and data to you. So essentially, any organization that are providing services are managing information on a daily basis in everything they do, okay? So one of the reasons why information is so valuable, it's because it's in everything we do, okay? And understanding how to be aware of that and understand the components around that creates and navigates those information system, which we'll get into, is very important. But I want to start off by saying, why is information so valuable? Because it's central to everything that every organization does, okay? Now let's define, again, a few of the key concepts. What is information? Okay, so we may sometimes use the word data, knowledge, information. All these terms sometimes are used interchangeably. They don't necessarily mean the same thing, or they're not the same concept. There are some nuances, and I want to be able to ensure that we go through these nuances right now. So Data in itself is a basic observation or measurement. Okay, so it has no meaning on its own. It has no meaning. It's just a piece of data. For instance, and I'll use a very simplistic example: 3 bananas. Okay, 3 bananas is a data point. You know you have 3, and you know you were talking about bananas. Now, what does that mean? It means nothing. It means nothing if you don't have a context or a point of reference to be able to say, so what does that mean for me? Okay, and so data is the building block and the raw material for information. But without any transformation, it is useless, or it is meaningless. It's not necessarily useless, it's meaningless. So to be able to generate meaning from data, you have to bring it to the information level, okay, which is the core of what we're discussing today. So it means that data needs to be transformed, analyzed, and it needs to be contextualized for it to have meaning, okay? I'll use my example of 3 bananas, okay? So 3 bananas is a data point. Now the context will dictate if it's good or bad or what it means. So if I say I have 3 bananas left in my household for this week, then I have a different context though than if I say I have 3 bananas left in stock in the grocery store that is the most popular in Montreal, where they go through the thousands of bananas a day, okay? So just the same point of data suddenly becomes, well, it's not really an issue if you have 3 bananas left at home, but it's a big problem for the grocery store if they don't have any bananas for the rest of the week and they know that their order is coming in 6 days and they're short on bananas, okay? So just a very simplistic example to distinguish data from information, okay? At the knowledge level, okay, the data and information are usually stored in either tangible on paper like this or stored digitally. And we'll talk about the technology aspect related to information afterwards. But they are stored or they exist somewhere. Knowledge is something that only exists in our mind. Okay, so it's the transition between a piece of information around us to what we can compute. Okay, so knowledge becomes information in our mind in a context that allows us to be transformed into decision and action. Okay, so information on its own can trigger a decision or action, but the ability to say, what do I do with the information of 3 bananas at home versus 3 bananas in the grocery store? The next step is making the decision or the action in relation to the information is knowledge. So if I'm at home, I'll put it on my grocery list. That's the action. It's the knowledge that I want bananas next week, and so I'll put it on my list. If it's in a grocery store, it means that there are some considerations to be reviewed to be sure that is this a business problem or is it not? Okay. So those are the 3 levels that I want to talk about today. You then see understanding and wisdom, which is again other layers and level. But I want you to remember that data are building blocks. They are meaningless. It's meaningless on its own. It needs to be transformed and contextualized to generate value, and it becomes information once you do that. Okay. Information has a lot of power because it can support the next step, which is decision or action. So again, information is contextualized data that has a meaning that can then be interpreted by individuals in the organization or the organization as a whole to decide the next action or the course of action. Without information, it's very hard to make decisions. Okay? So I know I'm skimming this very rapidly. So again, don't hesitate to ask questions if needed. Now, information, if we look at it from a context, organizational context, doesn't just lie there or exist on its own. So information is part of a system. So we call that information system. You can see on the screen right now a depiction of an information system. Every organization has an information system. Some are more elaborate, some are more simplistic. I would say some are more deliberate, but every organization has an information system. And the information system really is composed of 3 main categories. Hardware and software, which is the technology piece. There is a technological component to information, at least there is today. Before technology, it's another story, but today We have computers. Most of the data and the information we have is now stored digitally. And so there's a digital component to information systems that are there by default. The middle is the bridge where you have the data and the information itself. So the data and information will reside in the world of technology. It's going to be the bridge between that world and the world of humans, okay? Because we're going to come back and we're going to look at it, but once we have information, decisions and actions are in the realm of what we do. And so the decision and actions are usually formulated, especially in organization or service delivery organization or not-for-profit organizations, are funneled through procedures, actions, objectives, decisions, plan, and they drive what the organization and the people in the organization do. So in other words, every organization has an information system. It's always a component of technology, data and information, and people within the organization. That's if we look at it from the confines of the organization. With the world that we live in today, where everything is connected today, now we are moving beyond just what's happening within an organization. With connectivity today, we're in information systems of information systems. So in other words, organizations are now connected one another, where exchange of information from one information system or one organization goes to the next. So we're pollinating a series of information systems. So we're really talking about either a constellation or a galaxy of information system, where a lot of emerging trends around the notion of network, using logic through networks of information is becoming more and more standard, because it is more and more the reality in which we sit, okay? And the example of that is what we're doing today. How many organizations are connected today and hearing the same information? So this presentation is now broadcasted to the minds of 40 people representing, let's say, 25 to 30 organizations, okay? So that's an example of how now information system is, again, every organization has one. We all have a frame. And we are now also interacting in our information system, are interacting with others, which means that there are some gains and some risks of these interactions that can be, that have to be considered. Miguel, are we okay with on the chat?
There's nothing in the chat. We're good.
Okay, so that's either very good or very concerning. So again, feel free to ask questions. So we talked about the different components within the information system. Now let's talk about the technological component. Again, this is going to be very, but I just want to give you a general view of this. So the technological components can be viewed as three main components, okay? I'm going to get into, here's a software that does this, here's how you manage your information or your data. That's not the point of this. But I want you to frame IT in the following manner. There's the data component, so I'll go from 3 to 2 to 1. There's the data component. So the IT infrastructure, the technological component, is the house and host for the data itself. Okay, it's one of its main functions. So there's always a data component, and that's where it resides. There's the infrastructure piece, okay? And this is usually what is most common in the mindset of individual, which is we have the IT department. The IT department ensures that we have a computer, have a network, have access to internet. So they deal with what here is referred to as digital plumbing, okay? So there's a big aspect of technology in the world of information that is basically digital plumbing. It's ensuring that information flows from one point to another, that we have, you know, the data lake needed to be able to extract. We want to be able to push something out. We want to be able to access information. So it's really a question of digital plumbing. And there's an aspect of data management, meaning that it's managing the pressure from a data point of view. So there's a whole branch of specialties around infrastructure, which are really commonly known as the IT world. And there's the support. So ensuring that individuals have the support needed to be able to do so. Okay. So that's really what we see as the main notion of when we think of IT. Now there's another aspect that is becoming more and more predominant and important, and where the strategic value lies. It's in the apps, it's in the applications. So it's in the interface that we use to play with the information, okay? So there are some operational apps, and I can give you a very simple example of that. Microsoft Office or any system that allow you to deal with text and emails and sorts are operational. The reason they're operational is that everybody has them. So there's no strategic advantage to having Microsoft Office. Everybody has it, okay? But there are some apps that are created and usually generate a strategic advantage for an organization, albeit sometimes it's usually in the world of high tech for a short period of time because others will catch up. But when you have an app that is unique or conveys a unique value that others don't have, you suddenly generate strategic value and strategic advantage through that app. And usually in connecting this with the world of information, you connect this strategic value by being able to convey or bring to the front information and let others exploit information that others don't have, okay? A very basic example of that could be, again, if I use the Microsoft Office example or Microsoft Word, the first player that allowed more than one individual to play in the same Word document had a significant strategic advantage for the time being, okay? Still today, the system that does that the best still has an advantage because it completely changed how we do business or work on documents at so many levels, okay? So that's an example of something operational versus strategic. And so you can gain an advantage by creating a function or letting individuals do something or access information in a way that you are the unique bearer of that capacity, okay? And so a combination of technology and information allows for that. And it doesn't have to be a very high-tech piece. It can be very simplistic, but it's the ability to bring this to the front that generates an advantage through technology, okay? So again, just to summarize, the IT aspect, the technological aspect is it's the home of data. There's always an infrastructure component to it. It's necessary because without the infrastructure, there's not a big home, so there's not much you can do with the data. But it's in the apps world that you can generate game changers when you combine it with information, especially when you try to use technology to bring information to the front, the unique information that others could benefit from. Okay, so that's the technological component. Now let's talk about the people component. Okay, so from the people component, I want to stress this. This is important. Okay. People are responsible for framing issues, devising business processes, analyzing the information and making decisions. Okay. An information system supports decision making. It doesn't replace it. Okay. So yes, information systems, technology can make decisions in certain aspects, in certain specific cases, but they're usually very defined, really framed, and they were defined by people to say, we are going to allow the following things to be automated. Okay. So there is some automation that can be done, but people are still at the heart of interpreting information and making decisions. And I think that in the context of the organizations that are present today, this is still true. Service delivery or not-for-profit organization organizing programs and services is not necessarily something that can be automated and let alone and say, okay, here are a few basic commands, and advocacy will do it. Will arise on its own. It's very, very people-centric, and so to be ensuring that the individuals that needs to look at these issues, understand them, and frame actions, need to have the information at hand, and having the most valuable information to do so provides a great advantage. Okay, and so the people component, I want to stress it again, because without people, information does not get contextualized and does not get translated necessarily into action. And so there's an important people component to every information strategy. Now, we've talked about the technological, we talked about what is information, we talked about the technology, we talked about the people. Now we have to talk about the organization as well, because looking at an information strategy is you're looking at it from the lens of an organization wanting to do something. Okay, so this is very important to ensure organizational alignment with either identifying the right information that you want or identifying the key objectives. Why? Because again, using the examples of technology, you can do so many things with it that it's very easy to get lost in bells and whistles and take random directions that may generate absolutely no value for your organization, but burn a lot of resources, okay? So when starting the journey of understanding what is it that I would need to be able to move forward is always a question of what is my organization trying to accomplish? What am I trying to accomplish as a member of my organization? And what do I need to accomplish my function in terms of information that would make a difference? Okay, so we just provide here a simplistic example of organizations have organizational objectives and priorities. They have plan. So information in principle are there to support that execution, okay? And so we situated the information strategy as the second layer after a strategic plan or the strategic direction and purpose of the organization, just to demonstrate that it's not just something that you create on your own or on its own. It's there to support something that you're trying to achieve, okay? And here we have identified the IT strategy as the third layer. Reason being that we usually suggest our clients to start with the information question before you answer the technological question, okay? Why? Because if you move from, okay, I have the following strategic objective, what are the softwares or applications that I could use to help me do that? You're going to get a list of 27 things you could buy. It doesn't mean that you're going to be using them to actually achieve something. And usually clients will hit the same wall, which is, okay, so if I buy the following software, then the next question is, what information do I put in the software? Okay, so by starting with information, it's easier then to move to technology and say, I need the following supportive technology or enabling technologies to allow me to access, manage, collect, analyze, transform, visualize that information. And that information is supporting the achievement of this following objective. Okay, so again, organizational alignment is very important because organizational alignment will allow you to create a clear focus on what you're trying to achieve. It's going to be much easier to answer questions such as, what information do we need to accomplish fill in the blank? And it will mitigate your risk of starting to invest in technologies or other means that you may feel that it's going to help, but actually will not, okay? It will if you have randomly focused on the right thing, but it may become a real issue if you start investing in a series of technology and hope that technology will generate the results that you want. It won't do it on its own, okay? Now, here's an example of a framework of an information strategy that are picking up all the pieces that we have discussed as the key concept. Okay, so this is getting more into the concrete piece. So let's say you want to write an information strategy tomorrow. What should you be putting in? Okay, so the first question or the first component way up top here is, well, if you have an information strategy, you're bound to have information. So what information do you actually need? And knowing what you need doesn't mean that you actually have it at hand. So the identification of information is step one. What information do I need? Usually you start with a question, which is what are we trying to solve? And so we're going to need the following information, or wouldn't it be nice if we would be able to know the following information about the English-speaking community of Quebec, specific to the following health issues, for instance, okay? So you're identifying clear information needs. The next aspect of that is the acquisition of the information. So we're going to move to, I need that information. Do I have it? Yes, no. Oftentimes the answer is no. And so how do I get it? How do I acquire it? And acquiring it means, does it exist somewhere, but I don't have access to it? So how am I going to work out how to access that information? So it might be, oh, I have to collaborate with others. I'll partner up with the following organizations because they have that information, and we can figure out how we can collaborate together on this. You may realize that the information doesn't exist, and so you'll have to collect the information. And so understanding that you need to collect the information is one thing, and the second question becomes, how do you do it? Okay, how do you collect the information? Yes, you can go, let's say, a survey, but how many people do you need to respond to, and so on and so forth. Okay, so one key aspect and the starting point is, what's the information that I need, and how will I acquire it? Simple question, sometimes very hard to answer. Once the information is identified, and it comes back to the point I was making earlier on the organizational alignment, then it becomes easier to identify what are the appropriate enabling technologies that I need. Okay, for instance, I'm going to use the example of, okay, I'm going to need to do surveys. Okay, I'm going to need to do surveys for to gather information to 50 people. Okay, SurveyMonkey, deal. I'm going to need to capture information to 2,000 systematically within 2,000 organizations. Okay, that's a different story. Okay, but understanding, again, the data piece enables one to be able to reflect on what is the technology that I need, and then seek the expertise of your IT team in saying, I need to be able to do this. Okay, and for an IT individual, it's much easier to answer your question when the question is understandable and has parameters that an IT individual can understand, which is, how big is this? To what extent? What are the requirements? And what are you trying to get into in terms of information? And what does the information need to look like at the end? Okay, this becomes very practical. So by doing the first two steps, you've answered the question of information, you've answered the question of technology. We talked about the people aspect. So the third aspect is looking at the people aspect. Do we have the capacity internally to do what we're setting out to do? In other words, if there is some information to be transformed, do we have the capacity to do that internally? Will we have to go externally? Will we need to seek help for this? Should we build our capacity internally to be able to do this? Who needs to be involved in the process? Is this 1 or 2 people? Is this 25 people? So the aspect of the organization in tackling this question is a very important question, because it's not just a matter of doing surveys and having the technology. It's a matter of bringing it all together and making sense in order to be able to have all the pieces within the organization that fits together. Okay. Then you can move on, or you have the aspect of data transformation and information production. So you have to have the right information, the right tools, the right competencies and supports to be able to get to the full value of the information. And once you have transformed your data into an information and you have your viable information, then you get to the point of, how am I going to exploit this strategic value now? Okay, so this is a simple framework to give you a sense of how to go from nothing to strategically unique information that you can exploit. Okay, again, I'll come back to what I said earlier on. This can be applied in a very simplistic manner. So just gathering a few sources of information on a specific issue that the information exists, but you hadn't thought through, how can other information in my environment help me look at this differently and get to a conclusion and get to an action, can be very simplistic, but it follows the same format as, how will I understand a very complex question in a very complex system? Okay, so I'm gonna pause here for a minute or two if there are some questions. And since we're at the question part, I don't mind if you want to open up your mic and ask a question. And after this, we're going to get into a breakout session. So any questions, comments, clarifications at this point?
I have a question. It's Sylvia.
Yes.
It's hard to believe, I'd like you to reassure us, it's hard to believe when you've got a very small organization that you can do this. Really? So how would you reassure, the QCGN we use data, we try and use data, but it's hard work. How do you have, I guess I'm challenging you a little bit, Jean-François,
Yep.
on the capacity of most people, most organizations to do this.
Yep. Okay.
Is that fair? Or am I
Yep.
alone in saying, I mean, there's people around organizations, small organizations around this table. Do you think you can do this? Or like, I'm kind of challenging you on that.
So I'm just looking at the screen to see the reaction of others. So I'm going to answer briefly, and I chose an example of a practical example that will really aim at reassuring you, Sylvia, and others that may be connected, and saying, this is absolutely insane. This will not work, okay? And I can't see Miguel, but Miguel has a clear sense of where I'm going to be going with this afterwards, because we have faced this situation in the past. And even for ourselves, we thought of this and say, this is impossible, okay? But the question here is not, again, this may sound like it's very complex, but it isn't. It's almost bringing it back to a simplistic common sense approach, okay? Every one of you works with information every day. Every one of you makes decisions based on what you have, okay? Sometimes it's a matter of bringing just a different lens to what we already do. And so if you make decisions based on information that you have at hand, and you've been, you always use the same information because you've been told this is what you do. It's a question of challenging yourself, of asking you the question, if I would have other information to support this, I'm taking a decision today and I'm looking at this and I have one point of data on it, and okay, I can work through this, but that's all I have. It's a matter of imagining what would happen if I would have 3 points of information. Would I make the same decision? How would that help me get through the issues that I seem to be knocking my head against the wall once, every time, okay? And I'll be using an example of I can give you a foreshadowing of the conversation later on, but I'll give you an example of the official language minority Francophone communities. It's a space I've worked a lot.
Would you like to take that off the screen so I can see people's faces? I want to see if everybody. So I'm being harsh, but I want to. Anyway, yes, please. Go ahead.
Yes. So I enjoy your question, Sylvia, because I like the fact that you're challenging the question, because my reaction to your challenge is I want to challenge every one of you to think through this, okay? And I want to challenge you to think, what would that mean in your context, okay? Everything is context related. So in other words, think of the information you have at hand. If you would have one more piece of information in your puzzle that you feel would make a difference, what would it be? And how would you go about doing that? Okay, it starts from there. Now, in terms of capacity, I think that if you look at basic tools, so one reaction that we may get, and we might see it today in the conversations, is, well, we don't have the IT infrastructure for this. Okay, then my first question will be, do you have Microsoft Office? You probably do. Do you know what Excel is? Microsoft Excel makes wonders, and you already have it at hand, okay? And then I would ask you a question. Do you at least have one person in your organization that is relatively Excel savvy? Most of the time people will tell you, yeah, okay? So you usually understanding, so just bringing a light on these aspects brings a conversation in your organization where people go, oh, we actually have more skills than we thought on this. People in our organization actually have the capacity to do a few things. We may have much more information than we think. I'm assuming that everybody here has an organizational shared drive that is basically a maze, okay? So you probably have so much information and you're probably using 5% of it, okay? Not because you don't have the information, not because you don't have the time. It's just a question of answering. So how should we use it differently? How can we bring it together to help something? Okay, so asking questions and framing an intervention in your context does not necessarily require a team of 27 people. It's a question of asking the question and being aware that these questions can be asked, and being aware that you may have already much more at hand than you have realized that you had in your organization, to actually start using information and getting a little more oomph from what you already have to be able to push your objectives forward, to get out of the issues that you seem not to be being able to get out of. So just the nudge that you may need to accelerate on something.
JF, I think somebody wants to share something with the group here.
Yes. So go ahead. I think, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? I guess yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation and wonderful information. Just to contextualize, I can share an example from TIP or what we have seen as a problem, and then the solution that we have kind of on our way to create. So as you know, telehealth intervention program that we have started at the Jewish General Hospital, we are now serving more than 600 clients, and we are providing them weekly phone calls through volunteers. And just to give you a scope of the volunteers, we have more than 230 volunteers active in program right now. So just to give you this numbers, actually to give you a context of the scope, large scale scope of the program. On the one hand, we have about 600 clients. The other hand, we have 200 plus volunteers. There are weekly phone calls, and then there are several processes that are involved here. For example, one process is that we have a team of clinicians who have to make active relationship with the clients and with the volunteers to make sure that the program is delivered smoothly and there are no issues. Then we have stakeholders like community partners, and I see some of beautiful people here who are community partners with us, and they're also sending their clients to our program. We have to make sure that they also are satisfied with the program delivery. So there is this level of information exchange that is involved here. And then we have different teams within the program. So for example, there is volunteer management team, which has to deal with all the program teams. Then we have a training team, which has to make sure that the information that they are providing to volunteers is updated. And there's this other level of information communication needs. And last but not the least is the clinicians part, clinicians who are actually actively communicating and sharing information with all the team members. So this information is to give you context of several layers of information that is being exchanged within the program. But if you look at the scope, now how do you handle, I mean, you can have 5, 7 employees in a program, in a team, right? And then you can't expect there would be slippage of information and coordination when the scope is this big. So what we have actually come up with the solution is that we are going to actually automize our systems. This is something, if I correctly understand, Jean-François is talking about. So we are going to create a software system, a backend system, which will help connect all our teams to meet our information needs. But as John said, that when we go for this process, we will actually, right now we have the understanding how this is going to make the information processes simple for all teams to connect. For example, we want to understand how many volunteers this week have made their phone calls and if there were any issues or not. Now, if we know the question, what I understand correctly, that as an organization, you need to first identify your problem. That is the question that you will give to the software developer or somebody who can help you with this, right? Because not all organizations will have that technical aspect. You will have to recruit someone or you'll have to contract someone. But this person cannot help you if you don't know what the problem is. So you have to identify what the problem is. So we told the contractor that we want to monitor that there are 200 plus volunteers and they're making their weekly phone calls. So there will be a system, automation system within the software that will help us understand and see in just one click how this program is working. Similarly, if there is a data, there's information from the clinicians, and clinicians are receiving several problems, issues from clients through our community partners, through volunteers, through clients directly, and then they're feeding all that information in the system, in the software system. Now that is an information in the context that Jean-Francois is talking about, because that gives you a context, and then the training team can use that information. The volunteer management team can use that information. And we at the bigger, coordination level can also look at the information, and we can come up with solution, for future use. How do we improve this system if this situation is coming again and again? I have actually much more to share, but I just wanted to give you a context. I was thinking that as community organizations, it's a wonderful work that Jean-Francois is sharing here, but I think if I wanted to share an example to make it much more understandable. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to, but I'll just stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this. And yes, I think your example is great because it demonstrates, like you said, there's an issue, there's a need, or there's an opportunity. You organize actions around this, and you hit a point where when things are, you're trying to say, we're going to solve for this, then you move to a point where you say, okay, so what do we want to know about what we're doing that will help us move forward? And this is what drives everything else. So what I will do at this point, actually, since we're using examples, is I'll bypass a few steps in my presentation, and I'll get to the example, the very concrete example, because I think this may crystallize much more what I'm talking about. And I want to be sure that what I'm sharing with you today is not completely abstract, okay? So I'll bring back my presentation. You should be able to see it, and I'll use a very concrete example. And this example is one that will demonstrate that you don't need much to start off with, okay? So I want to talk to you about an organization that is now named Aussie. And I'll walk you can see the slides, the details of what was the issue, what was the information. So I'm not going to go through all these details. But what I want to use as an example is we are talking here about an organization, so a not-for-profit organization, that had zero experience in the world of technology, zero experience in the world of information analytics, but had an issue. And the issue was they had a mandate to advise the local health authorities and ministries of health on how to improve access to services in French in the health system. But the issue at hand was that information about that specific topic. So in other words, answering as simple as questions as, what can the system provide in French? Who's offering what? Who has a responsibility to do what? And how can we tell if there is capacity or no capacity? Okay, we started with these questions. So the observation was there is no information available, nor ways to get that information in the system. All we have is anecdotal evidence, a few scarce researches here and there that were done 10 years ago, and a few surveys here and there that says, well, and I always use that example, well, if you go to that hospital, there's a 40% chance on Tuesdays that you may get someone that speaks French, which is very useless when you're trying to answer the question from a community member, which is, where can I get a service in French? Okay, and I'm assuming that's probably very relatable in the context of English-speaking Quebecers for certain services. So we started off from there, and I'm going to walk through this quickly because I can talk about this for hours. So the first step was, okay, so what information do we need? So the first thing that we did internally at that point, it's my past career, was let's frame what information would make a difference. What do we need to know? Okay. And what we have identified there was, okay, so if we want to understand how the system can offer services in French, services in French are offered by people that speak French. Okay, that was our basic assumption. If we know where all the French-speaking individuals are within the entire system, and we know at what level they can speak, and we know what their profession, organization, and in what program they work, then we can assess, analyze, and repackage that data in any given possible ways we want to be able to understand what's the mental health capacity of the system, what's the long-term care health capacity of the system in French, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's what Ozzy did, and a simple basic information framework of 5 questions, a few basic calculations, and a data collection tool that they used Excel. Okay, so an Excel template was framed to capture the information that was needed. The angle that was taken at that point was trying to use the obligations to report on the topic by health organizations. Okay, so once we had the information identified, we figured what would be the channel that we could use. So what we did was suggest to swap the, to use a simple term, useless report that was used by organizations and put in that report as something that would generate value for the individuals. So the trade-off here was the tool that was devised generated value for the organization providing the information. Instead of just having to report on, it actually gave back. So what that did is people became inclined in putting information in because they were getting something back that was helping them manage their risks. Okay. So a simple Excel that was tested out was rolled out to 12 organizations in the Kingston area. So very minority community, Francophone community in the Kingston area in Ontario. Moved within a year and a half to 12 organizations to 1,500 organizations throughout the health system in Ontario. The organization actually got mandated by the Ministry of Health to roll it out in their entire system. That was about, I think, 4 years ago. And today, Ozzy is present in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and working to expand in Yukon because, again, for the same or similar purposes, recognizing that the system, the health system and the government priorities are completely different in these provinces, but doing the same approach to helping bring information and gathering information, analyzing information, and providing information to all stakeholders that has value for stakeholders, that actually helps everyone improve access to services in French by simply having the information that they can action and act on reasonably. Okay, so Sylvia, to answer your question, I'm smiling here, and I have to say Miguel is very familiar with this because he was one of the co-creators of the system at the beginning or the onset of this. A simple organization started off with basically 2 twigs and duct tape. No knowledge of technology, no knowledge of data analytics, minimal knowledge of the system they were operating in, but started with basic questions and built on from there. Okay, so it moved from an organization and no financial resources. This was on the corner of a table of an idea. Okay, so it was an idea that moved to something else and got traction, gradually generated funding on its own, and now is its own organization and expanding throughout Canada. So this is maybe not necessarily what's going to happen for every information strategy. Let's all agree here. But the point is that it starts with an idea. It starts with asking basic questions and exploring and building from there. Okay. So is this, I don't know if this is concrete enough for individuals. I can speak to this all day, but it's not the whole or entire point of the workshop today, but I wanted to be sure that what I was leaving you with an example that demonstrates that even without any resources, it doesn't cost anything to ask a question and find an answer to it. Okay, and get from there. And what, in my view, and I'm completely biased on this, but what in my view, this workshop is helping you do is those who built Ozzy in the beginning didn't have this framework. So it was a trial and error and understanding and figuring out as the organization went. Just having a bit of focus in retrospect would have helped greatly in that context. And so this is what we're trying to convey to you today, that just understanding the basic questions, being aware of the different components, and understanding that when you're going to start answering questions, and I can't remember the name of the previous example, of the lady providing the previous example, but it starts off with a simple issue. People gather around it. They start working towards it. Things starts to get organized. At some point, technology will be inevitable. And so understanding where technology fits in all this, and then answering new questions and asking new questions will snowball and things will evolve, okay? And I think what I liked about the previous example as well is one clear message. It's very hard to do this on your own, okay? Partners, collaborations, external stakeholders will be extremely useful in moving this forward. And with the example here of Aussie or this organization, it was not all done on the organization's own. It then connected with the Ministry of Health, with all the local health authorities, other Francophone organizations, the health service organizations themselves. So it was a gigantic collaboration where everybody needs to gain something out of it, and everybody needs to be able to convey information and gain from that information. And by doing so, things actually can move forward with the most simplistic approach, simplistic tool, and simplistic idea. Okay, so I don't know if this is helping clarify that this can be done with very little. It can start from nothing and become something different. But really what I want to leave you with, and I'm not done, but we're going to get into some activities, but I really want you to remember about this is understanding that information can help you focus and move forward on things and get you to think of questions through an information lens that you may not have asked yourself in the past, that may be able to help you get past some barriers that seem to be unsurpassable in the past. Okay, that's really, if you can get one message out of this session, I'm hoping that is one of them. Okay. So,
Jean-François,
yes,
I'd like to add something. This is like an act of faith, right? I mean, otherwise, that's why I challenged you a few minutes ago, and I was happy that we had a participant give us an example, because this is really, as I say, an act of faith. Can I really do this, or am I going to get drowned in trying to do this? I'm just encouraging people, and myself actually, to keep listening to you to see by the end of this couple of hours if we have, this act of faith that some of this is applicable and we can do some of this.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to the next little bit.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you're bringing also a point that's important. This is not something you do in 30 days. Okay. So let's be clear. There's a time frame here that requires much more than a few minutes or a few days. But understanding that if you start and move forward gradually, you are going to get someplace different. Okay. So what I will do now is I will stop talking and I will allow you to start talking. Okay. So,
François, I believe we had a question by Andrew.
Oh, yes, Andrew, sorry. You had your hand up at some point.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's fine.
It's okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry about that. First breakout session. So we're going to divide you into random groups. Okay. The idea of this session is, again, just to get your information lens muscle going, is choose an issue. And again, the example, the previous example was great for that. Choose an issue you'd like to see resolved in your context or environment. So you're going to be paired with random people. So figure out an issue. Usually getting funding is an easy one if you don't have any idea. Okay. And start from that issue and figure out, okay, if I use an information approach, what would that look like, and what can I gain from that? Okay, and you have a table here, and I would encourage you perhaps just to take a few notes, because I've realized that when we go into the breakout sessions, the PowerPoint doesn't follow you. Okay, so just try to look at the issue, frame the issue, and say, okay, what information do I have on that issue that can help me understand it, can help me act on it, can help me do whatever it may be on the issue. Based on that, you have what you have at hand and what you don't have that would make a difference. Okay, so let's say you say we have no idea about it. Good, that's not a problem. That's a point of reference. You have nothing. How do you move from nothing to something? Okay, and based on the information that you want to create or the information that you have at hand, what would be your approach to be able to collect it or access it? So assuming that you say, well, you know, a few stakeholders may have that information. We want to know, you know, how many clients are English speaking in that sector. Maybe you don't have that information, but most likely the service provider may have it. So how do you go and get it? Okay. And who would be the stakeholders involved? So the idea here again is just for you to talk it out. And after I'll give you about 10 minutes to discuss it in your group. And I would ask you to have one individual that can actually just do a quick report after at the end of the session, back in the plenary, so that we can hear what people went through, how they frame things, and what are the key observations that we can make from this. Okay. So again, starting from scratch, just grab an issue, figure, let's look at what information would you have or would you need to be able to address this issue? How would you go about it? And who would be involved? Okay. When we get back in the plenary, we're just going to look at answering the question, what was the issue? And what are your key learnings from that exercise? So was it easy or difficult to identify the information, acquire the information? Where were your challenges? What was easy? Okay. So I will ask Miguel to assign you to a group.
Just before we do this, Jean-François, I think we have Anne here with a question.
Oh, sorry, Anne, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to also say about the Excel spreadsheets, what an incredible tool it is. I'm with the NDG Senior Citizens Council, and I run a transportation program for medical appointments. And we transferred initially all our information onto Excel sheets, and it had everything from, you know, dates of birth and everything. So for data collection, it's amazing because from it, you take something as easy as the vaccination clinic. You know, I work with these people every day, and I've been there a long time, so I feel like I know the clientele base. But when the vaccination numbers came up and it was for 85 plus, I just went into the birth date section and got my spreadsheet on how many of our clients were 85 years and over. And I was really surprised that there were 32% of them were. So that's where Excel, and also, you know, Excel too, just so everybody knows too, LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a wonderful free teaching tools online, and it'll take you step by step learning how to do things like if you're technology challenged, you know, if you're challenged in that area, these videos can really help you. And really for questions, anytime I have a question on our clientele base, Excel, I mean, we have Salesforce, we have big data technology at our organization, but Excel has been a fabulous tool to use. It's free and it's easy. So I just wanted to put that there.
Thank you. And we'll get back to that as well in the end comments. So thank you for that. And it's true, Excel is extremely powerful and most people are unaware of the power that it actually holds. So so to get back to our breakout sessions, Miguel, I will ask you to assign people randomly and send them in their breakout rooms. Let's take 10 minutes for you to discuss this. Please have one individual ready to just summarize in 30 seconds and talk about the issue when we come back.
The end of breakout sessions is always brutal.
I heard your goodbye at the end of this discussion, Michael.
I never hear the end of that sentence.
Sentence over. Sentence.
There's no grace period.
you a 2-minute warning, but
well, you did.
Usually
you did.
just,
Hey, you did.
yeah.
We tried to.
Still not enough.
You still run over a cliff. So.
We're a very chatty community, as I told you, you know, and we like to talk to each other. And then when you split us up, it's very upsetting and unsettling for us.
Well, I'm sorry for having to do so, but rest assured, there is a second breakout session where you'll be reunited again before I break you up again. All right. So I'm happy to hear that you had a conversation, because the concern I always have is nobody talks in these things. And then, well, so what we'll do now is just, I'd like to hear one individual from each breakout room. Just provide a sense of a feel of the conversation and what are the key observation or learning from the exercise from your group. Okay. So I don't know if you remember your assigned breakout room number, but if we can get someone from the first breakout room, please go ahead.
That was us, but I mean, the topic was more around Bruce. I don't know if you'd like to take the floor on this.
Okay, we talked about, the issue was sort of about growing membership in our respective groups, and looking at, I guess our learning experience was your available information is found through your partners, or developing partnerships to help get the information that you need. We talked about how do you create information through channels. We talked about using different social media or different media platforms to try and advertise or sort of say, this is the kind of people we're looking for. Facebook, LinkedIn, not necessarily Twitter, but different kinds of media. When you talk about what kind of needed information, it was, I think we know what our information is because we're trying to grow membership. So it's like a lack of information about how to get our membership larger. But I think the big thing became stakeholder involvement, and Need to Succeed was our map to try and get ourselves to the place we want to be in order to get the information that we need. So that becomes, and the idea then of whatever technologies we're going to use would be based on resources and comfortability with existing data management sort of programs. But I think the big thing becomes, who are your partners and how can I map my way to get the information that I need? And using the resources that you have.
All right. Thank you for that. I'll let every group go, and then I'll make a little summary. So if someone from group 2 can speak up.
Yeah, so in group 2, we had a discussion about a project that Anya and Aviva were working on, really about how to use data. But I think the biggest roadblock we discovered was the last 2 points on your little table, like approaches to and accessing the needed information and the stakeholder involvement needed to succeed. So we thought it's also often difficult sometimes, especially now with just sending out a survey to collect all of the relevant data. People are more hesitant to respond to surveys. They don't answer truthfully. You don't get full responses. So we actually had Anne from NDG Senior Citizens Council, I think she's from. She's talking about how she's begun calling everyone to get as much data as possible. And so that was an issue we kind of felt impacts data collection, buy-in from people, and getting people to share information with you.
Thanks. Group 3.
So I'm willing to speak for group 3 unless somebody stops me. So we decided to take something small, which is what health and social services are available in English and where. And it's kind of the mirror image of your description of what ended up as OSI. So the issue that we defined is what's available and where is it available. And then we talked about, so what information exists right now, like what's available. And the answers that we had were that, well, CISs and CISs on their websites have some version of this, but often it's limited. The information that's there is not complete, it's not precise, it's not specific. There's various limitations. But we also said community organizations have a lot of this information. It also may not be complete and up to date and so on, but they have information. And lastly, individual people, like people who seek services and succeed in getting them or don't find them, they have information in their head. And people share this type of information. So individual people have information too. So then we talked about, well, what would we need to try to address the issue? And what we discussed was that we'd like to try to generate a complete list of what's available, even if that's challenging, and a complete list of where to go. And we also talked about that there's a different type of information that's a companion piece to like a list like that, which is sort of like a user's guide, advice, tips, because a system is never just simple. There's always other stuff you need to know to navigate it. So that was our definition of the info that we needed. And then we started to talk about, so what's the approach we would take to getting this information? And it was around that time that the 58-second warning showed up. So this part got really collapsed, but long enough to say that this part and the last part, which is identifying the stakeholders, it seemed to us, at least in this context, that they needed to be sort of done together. The approach, because we talked about you could get focus groups, you could develop questions or questionnaires. We didn't complete that list, but if you do these things, then you're already sort of having in mind who you're going to do them with, who are kind of the answer to the question, who's the stakeholders. So probably in this context, the two steps would be developed together. We never got into where would we store the information, how would we disseminate. We just never even got there because we got shut down. But anyway, that illustrates the type of discussion that we had about that issue. If anybody wants to add, please do.
Everybody's good? Okay. Thanks, Michael. There's a fourth group, I think. So.
Yes. So our group, we talked about the issue of access and knowledge around funding resources. In this case, it was specific to a community organization. The things that came up, one on the information side was more around creating an inventory of government and key funding sources, just to know what's out there and what information is required to get them. And then the other piece we talked about was more of a networking component of understanding what other organizations are doing. Perhaps there's more innovative or new approaches coming out. And then kind of the third layer to that was capacity to do these things. So on the one hand, tracking and collecting the right information to make sure you're getting government funding or have the best chance to do so, and or other sources. And then the other piece too was collaboration around the networking piece. Perhaps figures like the QCGN as an example to set up these types of platforms to learn from one another and that kind of thing.
Okay, thanks. So just want to reflect a few thoughts from this. So identifying an issue never seems to be a problem. So in other words, usually framing an issue or identifying where to begin seems to be something that's, well, all groups succeeded quite easily to do that. Other things that are apparent is that trying to sort out what information is available or not available and what could you use also seemed to be fairly easy to do. So in other words, no group drew a blank on, we have no idea what we're going to be doing about this. Okay, so it's already obvious that sifting out and sorting out what could be available information and what we need to be able to move on this seems quite apparent, which is good as well. What also kicks into view is what is the biggest challenge through this? It's recognizing that just to solve one specific issue, rapidly it becomes something that is tied to so many other players. Okay, and it's what becomes apparent is getting information is no longer an information game; it's a relationship game. It's an environmental collaboration game. It's a how do you work together using the premise of information to be able to exchange information, but it rapidly shifts to, okay, how do we do this? Okay, how do we bring partners in the mix? There was the example of how do we create the incentives for stakeholders or individuals that we want to gather information from to actually share that information. So we know where the information is, but how do you manage to get it is another issue, right? So either incentives or constraints. Usually incentives are better. So the question of who gets what out of this becomes an important question to answer to be able to move on this. And there was a few identification of, we know what we want to do, and we are also aware there's a lack of information. So a gap. An information gap is also a very good place to start because it becomes obvious. And there is an action to be, there is something to be done with that gap to be able to move forward on. So the things I've heard here were really around, rapidly moving from an issue to, we're going to need more than ourselves in this, okay? It's a question of recognizing that the information exists elsewhere, and it's how, and that's all where the strategy piece kicks in. How do we acquire that information? Okay, and there was a few questions that were raised around technology, but again, based on what I've heard, technology was not necessarily an issue. Things can be framed in a smaller fashion. Simple tools can be used, but a question, so technology did not seem to be a big hindrance, at least in the conversation we had today. Okay, and usually it's not necessarily the main issue. Especially in an environment, based on my understanding of the organizations on the call today, accessing information, collaborating, and building something that it requires a numbers of stakeholders is the hardest part or the more complex piece to deal with, not the information side of things. Okay, so I'm happy to hear what I've heard because it demonstrates that just through an information lens, you can look at an issue and focus your attention on specific things or actions that maybe are already apparent to you, but maybe weren't, and devise a course of action that knowing that if you can get your hands on that information, whatever comes after will actually be able to move somewhere else. Okay, so those are the things that I've heard. I don't know if anybody else wants to echo something different. Or want to share something else that I may have missed. Yes, I see the comment saying we can understate the importance of organizational culture in supporting the acquisition. Yes, okay. One of the things that I'm hoping you get out of the conversation today is any organization that wants to, well, information is so central to everyone today that collaborating with others to get more information is a better way to go than trying to stick on your own and have less information. Okay, so organizational culture is a challenge. It's always a challenge. There's systemic cultures. There are different things, but those are observations that you can figure out how to work through to get to the information. Recognizing information is the target. Go ahead, Serena.
I think, your earlier slides kind of touched on this, and I think that organizational comment is really important. The piece that we also don't want to forget is the strategic planning element. The systems are crucial, but they have to come after the planning of, what are our priorities, what are we trying to achieve, and then create the system for it. So I just want to make sure that's not getting lost as well.
Yes, and you just gave me a perfect segue into the next slide, or if I use the hockey analogy, une passe sur la palette. So I'll move into that one right now, if you may. So the question of getting started, okay? I have one simple slide here on the practical getting started on this. And I'd like to have another quick breakout session before we end. So I'm just going to get through this very quickly. And Sabrina, your segue was great, because the question, yes, of culture, or anything related to information, as the organizational alignment slide depicted, the information strategy is dependent on the strategic objectives, okay? So if the strategic objectives are not aligned, well, it's almost impossible to have strategic objectives that are not aligned with using information. But in terms of collaborating and in terms of approaching a collective approach to information, I understand your point. So here, I guess one of the things that I can stress on this point is, when looking at it at an issue from an organizational and from an informational lens, the previous exercise demonstrated quickly that partnering and collaborating is an important component. So which means that if as a community or a group of organization representing a community, if you share the same strategic objectives or common objectives and common priorities, working the information aspect becomes easier as well, okay? Because remember that the information system is within your organization and beyond in a greater network, okay? I think the group here represents an example of a greater network. And so if you're looking at it from a priorities, understanding certain strategic objectives or identifying common objectives is one good place to start to be able to move and to then use the information strategically, okay? Now, I'm just gonna come back for a few seconds, back within the box of the organization. And so beyond the strategic objectives, current issues or opportunities, you will usually help frame why one would want to go towards an information strategy. But to start to move on these things, then the next step is really to look at assessing your environment, okay? And in your environment, there are two considerations that we've put here that are important. One is your organizational readiness, okay? So again, this is applicable at different scale. It doesn't mean that you have to have everything aligned, but it's important to assess where you're standing. Take stock of some of the key aspects so that you go into this understanding what you have, okay? And this includes your IT capacity, data and information availability and access. It includes your workforce skills and competencies, and it includes your leadership and management, okay? An information approach doesn't only mean that you have IT personnel and data analysts. If you're using this to move objectives forward, organizational objectives, it means that everybody in the organizations from the beginning to the end, from top to bottom, is involved in some way in this process. And in this perspective is important and will touch the question on culture, okay? So if the leadership of the organization does not believe in the value of information, it's hard to move on this. Okay, and leadership can mean board of directors, can mean executives, can mean direct management levels. It doesn't matter. But if there is no understanding or awareness of the place of information in an organization and the power that it holds, then yes, it might be a first place to start. Okay. Beyond assessing readiness, there's also the question of risks. Okay, so time. To move forward with an information strategy is not something that I mentioned earlier on, it's not something you do in 12 hours. So there is a recognition that time will need to be invested rapidly, and the organization needs to be ready to do so, okay? There are some financial resources from the onset, and it doesn't mean that you have to have important financial resources. It means that you need to be aware of what you have. Because if you have to go into the realm of technology, technology costs money. And investing in technology is not just a one-shot deal because you have to maintain it as you move along. So it has to be a deliberate decision and understanding of what you're investing in to be able to move on this, okay? So understanding what are the resources. And so if you're in a situation where you know that you can start moving with the information piece, but the moment you're gonna ask for one piece of software, the answer is no, then you may understand that you're gonna hit a limit. And understand the competency gap. So we talked about people, information, and technology. If you don't feel that within your organization you have the necessary resources to do what you have to do, it doesn't mean that people can't learn. It doesn't mean that there's nothing to be done about it. It just means that you have to understand where your competency and capacity lies to be able to use it, to be able to move forward. Okay. So
Jean-François,
yes.
I'm going to interrupt for a second. I know you have another little bit of a get together.
Yes.
But
we can do it collectively.
Yes, thank you.
So it was plan B. So it was either a breakout or collectively, and it's more a reflection more than anything else. So I'm aware of the time. The idea here was just to have a conversation on the readiness of your organization and just have points where you can think about it. So this is something you can do on your own. It's something we can do, and we're going to do it collectively. I'd like to hear what people have to say about this. But the idea here is just take a second to think, okay, so now that I get a better understanding, or I've been exposed to the notion of the value and the power of information, I understand its different components. If I'm to assess where my organization stands today, if you're taking stock of where you stand today, whether it be you, your department, your organization, in terms of IT capacity, in terms of data and information, workforce, leadership, time, all possible things, what would be your take on it? Okay. So would you say your organization is ready to use information strategically? Yes, no, and why not? So we can take the last 10 minutes and then we can open the floor. So if anybody wants to take a swing at this, go ahead. And I'll ask you though, just before I do that, since we're a big group, please try to be succinct so we can have a few people that will be able to talk.
I just want to share. I just want to share. There's some really good resources about this through books. There's a book, Measure What Matters. It's for-profit sector, but it can easily be transferable to not-for-profit, and it gives some really great ideas about how to instrumentalize data and how to think of data and apply it within an organization. That's my only contribution.
Thanks, Gemma.
Bruce, I just wanted to say quickly that I think it's great and sort of reminded us that how good Excel is as a database manager format, because for small organizations, we might not have the resources to really go out and buy sort of other things that we need. So I think that's an important part. And I'm drawing a blank on what I was going to say on the second. So I'll come back. Sorry.
Thanks, Bruce. Any other comments?
From the QCGN, it's a personal kind of, over many years being the Director General of this organization. We've always, we say we are an evidence-based organization. We have very good people, Andrew, and I don't know if Stephen's still around. We do work with data. I'm not sure that we have been as deliberate in placing that what we do and what's important as you suggest in this frame. Even though we do information, even though we go to Stephen and all of us are very interested in the data, I'm not sure that we've been as deliberate as we should be in terms of the support to a strategic planning information strategy. So I'm owning that up. and you know, the QCGN is known for, I think, and credible in what we do in numbers and data and the analytics we give to it. So I'm just owning that up.
Can I add something here?
Yes, go ahead.
I think one thing that this automation, if I may call it, it does for us as organizations is that it creates institutional memory that we don't think of. So for example, if you take many organizations here, some are 20 years old, some are 15 years old, some are 10 years old, but we cannot, and people come and go as team members, and then you lose track of what you have been doing and what actions you took when there was a problem in the past. But if you do this automation and if you centralize all this information using technology, you actually, this is an indirect benefit that we don't think, but this creates an institutional memory also. And it's on your fingertips, right? So 25 years down the road, if you come up with a situation and you're unable to find an answer or solution, you can actually go back to your system and look up for a situation, similar situation, and can see how you resolved it in the past. And it can actually give you some guidance and maybe connection with people who were there at the time, and you could always contact back with these people. And yeah, so this is one aspect. And I've also added here in the chat that friends, we might think that this is automation or bringing this information technology in is expensive project. But if you do cost benefit analysis, this is a term which is used mostly in management sciences. But if you see, for example, if you spend $10,000 to do your automation, but if you see the cost, it will save you from actually cutting down 30% of your organizational work. And the money that you will be actually spending for that additional 30% that you would be able to save, the time, you know. So if you do cost benefit analysis in the long run, it's going to actually benefit you. So I would strongly urge you, we live in a society and in an era which is based on information technology, and maybe we can start with a little bit of it. We don't have to go full on, but maybe creating these smaller steps will then help us to get a bigger picture here. Thank you.
Yes.
If I may, I don't know how.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'd just like to touch again on, I think it was Sabrina who said the importance of the strategic plan, and I really have to second her on that. Like if you have a well-researched strategic plan, like a 5-year, it keeps your focus, because tech can come in and out and it can wow you for a moment, and the next second nobody's following it and it's chaos, right? So that 5-year plan, if you then incorporate the tech into that, and you're getting your partners, your board, your staff, everyone on board with that, then you all move forward with that same vision. So I think that's really like a key first step.
Thank you for the comments. They are all very apropos and very relevant. And I have to echo just very quick, and then I'll wrap up. But yes, sometimes the upfront cost seems to be expensive, but here we're talking, it's more an investment than an expense, okay? If it's an expense, maybe it's because there's always a basic cost for this, but it can generate real important results. And so it's important to understand what you're going to be producing with this to be able to identify the outcomes, okay? And yes, technology comes and goes. There are fads, flare-ups, beautiful things you can do. Everybody gets wild with a super dashboard. That lasts for 30 seconds. But the knowledge, the information, the accumulation, and I like the institutional memory that can be brought in either organizationally or through the network, okay, is invaluable. That's where the value of information kicks in. That's why data is the new oil, okay? So I just wanted to echo that quickly. And so, recognizing that we are at the end of our time, I just want to thank you for participating today. And I'll let Sylvia have the last word. We have put in the chat a satisfaction survey. Moment to answer it. There are also some questions around if there would be a part 2 to this, or what would you like to know more into depth? it'd be invaluable to understand where your head is at the end of all this. We understand that this is an introduction to the topic, so we had to skim a lot of concepts. I'm hoping that your head is swirling a bit because it's usually the initial impact that this topic has, but I'm inviting you to think about it and remember what and how information can help you on a day-to-day basis, and how you can gain how you can have a strategic use or gain a strategic advantage from using information, okay? And just on your day-to-day basis, if you start thinking in that lens, interesting things can come out of it, okay? So I'll leave you on this word and I'll let Sylvia close the session.
Unmute. The dog barked. I didn't want you to hear the dog barking. Thank you. Thank you for sticking with us. It's 2 hours. It's kind of dry stuff, but it's important, I think. We thought it was important, and please fill in that survey. We are exploring how this be helpful to you out there working with us in terms of your priorities, your local priorities, organizational priorities, local priorities, and then rolled up to provincial priorities. So we're very interested in how to integrate this into our priority setting. And I appreciate the time you took. And I do appreciate Jean-François and Jennifer, Sabrina, and Riley particularly for having worked with Jean-François on bringing this piece of work into something usable for us today. A lot of work was put into it, and thanks team. Thank you, Jean-François. And we do hope we have achieved today giving you a small appetite on going forward with information strategies. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay well. Bye-bye.